The whiskey in those Old West saloons was watered down and tasted like kerosene. The poker games were rigged, but the food, the actual food that kept cowboys alive through cattle drives and outlaws fueled between bank robberies, that was real. Number 8 on this list got Jesse James through his last winter in Missouri. Number 12 was so cheap it cost less than a single bullet. And trail hands ordered it 3 times a day for months straight. Number 1 was eaten by lawmen and criminals alike, often at the same counter. And nobody ever talked about it. These meals disappeared because we decided the Old West should look like a Clint Eastwood film instead of what it actually was. A bunch of hungry, exhausted men eating whatever would keep them upright for another 16 hours in the saddle. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Here is what Hollywood never told you. Before the railroads brought refrigerated cars and canned goods became cheap, the American West ran on a specific kind of fuel. Not the romanticized beans around a campfire, not the Hollywood saloon with a full menu and white tablecloths. The real food was harder, stranger, and built for one purpose only: keep a man going when there was nothing else for 50 miles in any direction. Because here is the truth. A cowboy on a cattle drive from Texas to Kansas in 1872 ate the same 6 things for 3 months straight. A saloon cook in Dodge City made exactly 4 meals, rotated them through the week, and called it a menu. The men who walked through those swinging doors were not ordering surf and turf. They were ordering whatever would stick to their ribs long enough to get them to the next town. And what stuck was not what you think. Wyatt Earp eating pickled eggs at a bar in Tombstone at 9:0 inches the morning because that was breakfast. That was the West. Number 15. Sourdough pancakes with sorghum syrup. The flapjacks that kept the frontier from starving. Every saloon kitchen west of the Mississippi had a sourdough starter bubbling in a crock near the stove. Flour, water, and wild yeast captured from the air. Fed daily, kept alive for years. When a cook left town, she took the starter with her. That starter was worth more than the cash register. The pancakes came out thick and tangy, fried in bacon grease on a flat iron griddle until both sides turned golden brown and the edges crisped. Sorghum syrup poured over the stack, dark and molasses rich, because real maple syrup cost more than a week's wages and had to be shipped from Vermont. A plate of sourdough pancakes cost 10 cents in 1876. Cowboys ate them for breakfast before a 14-hour day moving cattle. Miners ate them at midnight after a 12-hour shift underground. The pancakes were dense enough to stay with you until supper. That was the entire point. The sourdough starter never died as long as someone remembered to feed it. Saloon cooks in Montana had starters that came overland on the Oregon Trail in the 1840s. 30 years later, those same starters were making pancakes in Silver City. You do not get that kind of continuity at IHOP. Number 14. Salt pork and hardtack, trail food that tasted like chewing leather soaked in regret. This was not a saloon meal. This was what you ate when there was no saloon for 200 miles. Salt pork came in barrels, preserved in brine so thick it would burn your mouth if you did not soak it first. Sliced thin, fried hard until the fat rendered out. Eaten with hardtack biscuits that were baked twice to remove all moisture and could survive in a saddlebag for 6 months without spoiling. Hardtack had the texture of a shingle and tasted like absolutely nothing. You soaked it in coffee to make it soft enough to chew. You fried it in the pork fat if you had teeth strong enough to risk it. Cowboys called it sheet iron bread. They were not exaggerating. A pound of salt pork cost 12 cents in 1870. A box of hardtack cost 8 cents and lasted a month. Trail bosses bought it by the crate because it was the only thing that would not spoil between Fort Worth and Abilene. The men who ate it did not complain because complaining would not make steak appear. Cattle drives in the 1870s could last 90 days. For the first 60 days, the crew ate salt pork and hardtack twice a day. They remembered every single meal, none of them fondly. Number 13, vinegar pie, the dessert that required no ingredients anyone would miss. When you are 400 miles from the nearest orchard and sugar costs 25 cents a pound, you do not make apple pie. You make vinegar pie, a bottom crust filled with a mixture of water, vinegar, sugar, flour, and butter, baked until it set into something that tasted like a lemon custard if you squinted hard enough. It was not good. It was acceptable. That was the highest compliment any food on the frontier received. Acceptable meant you could eat it without your face doing something involuntary. Vinegar pie cost 5 cents a slice in saloons across Kansas and Nebraska in 1875. It appeared on tables after supper, cut into thin wedges, served to men who had not tasted fruit in 4 months. They ate it because it was sweet and because sweetness was rare enough to matter. The recipe came west with settlers who knew how to make food out of nothing. Vinegar kept forever. Flour was cheap. Butter you could make if you had a cow and enough patience. Everything else was optional. Frontier cooking in one sentence. Number 12, beans and bacon, the meal that built the West and destroyed every stomach in it. A pot of pinto beans cooked low over a fire for 6 hours with a slab of bacon thrown in for fat and flavor. That was it. No onions unless you were close enough to a town to buy them. No tomatoes unless someone had planted a garden and you were there at exactly the right time in August. Just beans and bacon and enough salt to make it survivable. A pound of dried beans cost 6 cents in 1868. A slab of bacon cost 15 cents. One pot fed 8 men. The math was simple and the food was cheaper than anything else that would keep a crew alive. Cowboys on cattle drives ate beans and bacon every single day for months. They ate it for breakfast with coffee. They ate it cold for lunch straight from the pot. They ate it reheated for supper with more coffee. Then they lay awake half the night because beans and bacon do not digest quietly. Trail cooks added chili peppers if they could get them. Not for flavor, but because the heat covered up the monotony. A man who had been eating beans for 40 days straight needed something. Anything to make his mouth believe this was a different meal. It never was. Number 11, oyster stew. The dish that made no sense until you understood the railroads. Here is something nobody tells you about the Old West. Oysters were everywhere. Canned oysters. Shipped by rail from Baltimore. Sold in every general store from Cheyenne to Tucson. They were cheaper than beef and easier to keep. And saloon cooks turned them into stew. A can of oysters dumped into a pot of milk. Heated until it barely simmered. Seasoned with salt, pepper, and a piece of butter. Served in a bowl with crackers crumbled on top. It cost 15 cents in 1880 and tasted like the East Coast, which made it exotic enough to matter. Cowboys ordered oyster stew in saloons because it was the only thing on the menu they could not make themselves over a campfire. Gamblers ordered it at 3-0 inches the morning because it was the only food still available after midnight. Wyatt Earp mentioned oyster stew in a letter to his brother in 1881. He called it decent. The oysters came in tins, stamped with the packing date and the name of the cannery. A saloon cook in Deadwood in 1877 opened a tin packed in Baltimore 3 months earlier. That oyster had traveled farther than most of the men eating it. If you are learning something the history books skipped, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell. There is a lot more where this came from. Number 10, fried beefsteak with pan gravy. When cattle country finally had cattle to spare, after months of driving cattle north, the cowhands who delivered them to the railheads wanted one thing: beef, not the trail boss's beef, not stolen beef. Beef they paid for, cooked right, served hot. A thick cut of beefsteak, usually chuck or round, pounded flat with the back of a skillet, seasoned with nothing but salt, fried hard in a screaming hot pan until a crust formed on both sides, pulled medium rare if the cook knew what she was doing. The pan drippings, mixed with flour and water, became the gravy, poured over the steak and a pile of potatoes. Beefsteak cost 20 cents a pound in Dodge City in 1878. A full plate with potatoes and gravy cost 35 cents. Cowboys, who had just been paid after a 3-month drive, ordered 2. They were making up for lost time. Saloon cooks in cattle towns learned fast. When a trail crew came through, you cooked steak until you ran out or they ran out of money. Whichever came first. Most of the time, it was the money. The beef was tougher than what you get now. The cattle were rangier, leaner, worked harder. The steak required serious chewing. Nobody complained. They had been chewing salt pork for 90 days. Number 9, calf's head cheese. The thing cowboys pretended they did not love. Take the head of a slaughtered calf. Boil it for hours until the meat fell away from the bone. Pick out every edible piece of meat, tongue, cheek, all of it. Mix it with the gelatinous cooking liquid. Season it with vinegar and spices. Pour it into a mold and let it set overnight into a firm loaf that's sliced clean. That was head cheese. It cost almost nothing to make because the head was scrap. It sold for 10 cents, a serving in saloons throughout Texas and Colorado in the 1870s. Cowboys ordered it and then looked around to make sure nobody saw them enjoying it. The texture was odd, firm but yielding, rich and savory, with a faint vinegar tang that cut through the fat. Sliced thin and served cold with mustard and pickles. Eaten for lunch between card games or as a late-night snack after the tables closed. Here is what made head cheese brilliant. A butcher could sell the steaks and roasts to rich customers and still make money from the head by selling it to a saloon cook. Nothing wasted. The entire animal turned into profit. Frontier economics in edible form. It disappeared because we decided eating a calf's face was beneath us. It was not beneath anyone in 1875. It was food. Number 8, dried apple pie. What passed for luxury when you were 1,000 miles from an orchard? Apples dried into leathery rings, rehydrated in water overnight, cooked down with sugar and cinnamon until they turned into something that resembled pie filling, baked between 2 crusts made with lard, served warm if you were lucky, room temperature if you were not. Dried apple pie cost 10 cents a slice in saloons across the frontier in 1876. It tasted like a memory of apples, faint and distant, but it was sweet, and that made it valuable. A miner in Virginia City who had not seen fresh fruit in 8 months paid 15 cents for a second slice. The cook did not argue. The dried apples came in burlap sacks from Missouri or New York. Shipped west by the ton, they lasted forever, required no refrigeration, and turned back into something edible with enough water and patience. Every saloon kitchen kept a sack in the pantry. Trail cooks made dried apple pie on cattle drives when they wanted to keep morale up. It appeared after a long day, still warm from the Dutch oven, and grown men got quiet while they ate it. Pie does something to people. Evenbat pie, even pie made from apples that had been dead for 6 months. First pattern break. Here is what nobody tells you about Old West food. It was not cowboys sitting around a campfire singing songs and eating beans. It was 30 men trying to choke down the same meal they had eaten for 60 consecutive days, while dealing with dysentery. Because beans and bacon do not care about your digestive system. The food was fuel, nothing more. If it tasted good, that was an accident. Number 7. Son of a gun stew. The cowboy meal with a name you cannot say on television. When a calf was slaughtered on a cattle drive, nothing went to waste. The heart, liver, kidneys, tongue, brain, sweetbreads, all of it went into a pot with onions, if you had them, chili peppers if you did not, and enough water to cover. Simmered for hours until everything broke down into a thick, dark stew that smelled like a slaughterhouse and tasted better than it had any right to. Cowboys called it son of a bitch stew. The name got cleaned up for polite company. The stew did not. It cost nothing because it was made from scraps. A trail cook who tried to throw away organ meat would get run out of camp. You used everything. The brain added richness. The heart added texture. The liver added a faint mineral bitterness that you either loved or tolerated. A pot of son-of-a-gun stew fed the entire crew. They ate it with whatever bread was available, usually biscuits or leftover cornbread. They sopped up the gravy and went back for seconds. Not because it was delicious, because it was there and they were hungry, and tomorrow they would be eating beans and bacon again. Saloons in cattle towns served it when a rancher brought in a fresh slaughter. It sold out by noon. The customers knew what they were getting. They ordered it anyway. Number 6, boiled beef and potatoes. The most boring meal the West ever produced, eaten by everyone. A cut of beef, usually brisket or chuck, thrown into a pot of water with potatoes, onions, and carrots if the cook felt generous, boiled until the meat turned gray and tender and the potatoes dissolved at the edges. Served in a shallow bowl with the cooking liquid poured over the top. It cost 25 cents in saloons throughout Kansas and Wyoming in 1875. It appeared on tables at noon, again at supper, and sometimes cold the next morning for anyone desperate enough. Boiled beef was not good. It was sustenance in its purest form. Meat, potatoes, liquid, everything you needed to survive and nothing you wanted. The beef tasted like hot water. The potatoes tasted like the beef. The broth tasted like both. Here is why it mattered. A saloon cook could make one pot in the morning and serve it all day. The beef got more tender the longer it cooked. The broth got richer. By supper time, it was actually acceptable. By the next morning, it was something you ate because you paid for it. Cowboys on winter cattle drives heated up leftover boiled beef over a campfire and called it stew. Miners ate it underground because it was the only hot food they would see for 12 hours. It kept people alive. That was the beginning and end of its job description. Number 5, baking powder biscuits with gravy, the breakfast that saved more lives than any doctor. Flour, baking powder, salt, lard, and water mixed into a dough, rolled out, cut into rounds, baked in a Dutch oven until they rose tall and golden, split open and covered with sausage gravy made from pork drippings. Flour and milk. A plate of biscuits and gravy cost 15 cents in 1879. Cowboys ate it before dawn and did not eat again until dark. The biscuits sat heavy in your stomach for hours. The gravy added enough fat to keep you warm. Together they were a complete survival system disguised as breakfast. Trail cooks made biscuits every morning without fail. The dough came together in 5 minutes. The baking took 20. By the time the crew woke up, the biscuits were ready. Hot food before a cold day on horseback. It mattered more than you would think. The gravy was made from whatever meat had been cooked the day before. Sausage if you had it. Bacon if you did not. Plain pork fat if you were desperate. The cook fried it. Added flour to make a roux. Poured in milk. And stirred until it thickened. Poured over the biscuits while both were still hot. Men who grew up on farms recognized biscuits and gravy instantly. It was what their mothers made. That recognition, that brief moment of familiarity in the middle of nowhere, was worth more than the calories. Second pattern break. The Old West was not gunslingers and sheriffs. It was cooks making the same 6 meals over and over because those 6 meals were the only things that worked. Beans kept forever. Biscuits were fast. Beef was available. Everything else was a gamble. And out there, nobody gambled with food. Number 4, cornbread and buttermilk, the southern meal that followed Cowboys north. Cornmeal, buttermilk, eggs, baking soda, and a little lard mixed into a batter and baked in a cast iron skillet until the bottom turned dark and crispy and the top set firm. Cut into wedges, served hot, eaten with a glass of cold buttermilk on the side. It cost 5 cents for a wedge of cornbread and 3 cents for a glass of buttermilk in saloons throughout Texas and Oklahoma in 1877. Cowboys from the South ordered it without thinking. Cowboys from the North tried it once and either loved it or never touched it again. The buttermilk was thick and tangy, almost sour, with a richness that coated your mouth. You drank it cold. You crumbled the cornbread into it if you wanted. You ate them separately if you had manners. Either way, it filled you up fast and kept you full for hours. Saloon cooks in cattle towns kept buttermilk in crocks in the coolest part of the kitchen. It lasted longer than regular milk and tasted better with cornbread. The combination was specific, regional, and beloved by anyone who grew up eating it. Trail cooks made cornbread in a Dutch oven buried in coals. It came out uneven, burned on the bottom, raw in the middle sometimes. But it was bread, and bread was a luxury. You ate it, and you were grateful. Number 3, fried salt pork with red-eye gravy. When coffee became a sauce and everything made sense, a thick slice of salt pork fried hard in a skillet until the fat rendered and the edges crisped. Pulled from the pan, black coffee poured directly into the hot grease. Scraped and stirred until it picked up every bit of fond from the bottom. Reduced into a thin, dark, aggressively savory sauce. That was red-eye gravy, poured over the pork, sopped up with biscuits, eaten at dawn by men who needed the caffeine, the calories, and the salt all at once. It cost 10 cents in saloons throughout the West in 1874. The pork was cheap. The coffee was free refills. The gravy was an accident that became tradition. Somebody poured coffee into a pan one morning, tasted the result, and kept doing it. The name came from the way the grease separated and formed circles on top of the coffee that looked like bloodshot eyes. It was not appetizing to look at. It tasted like the platonic ideal of breakfast. Salty, bitter, rich, and strong enough to wake you up from the outside in. Cowboys ordered it. Gamblers ordered it. Outlaws ordered it. Town sheriffs ordered it. Everyone ate red-eye gravy. It cut across every social boundary the West had. You either understood it or you did not. There was no middle ground. Number 2, sourdough bread with bacon grease. The emergency meal that required no cooking. A slice of sourdough bread, thick and chewy, spread with bacon grease saved from breakfast. Eaten cold, eaten standing up, Eaten because you were too tired to wait for a real meal. It cost nothing because the bread was left over and the grease was free. Saloon cooks kept a jar of bacon fat near the stove. Cowboys reached for it without asking. A swipe of grease on a piece of bread kept you going for another 4 hours. That was all you needed sometimes. The grease was soft at room temperature, easy to spread, rich and salty. The sourdough was tangy and dense. Together they tasted like a poor man's butter and bread, which is exactly what they were. Nobody pretended otherwise. This was the meal you ate at 20 inches the morning when you stumbled into a saloon after 16 hours in the saddle and the kitchen was closed. The bread was in a basket on the bar. The grease was in a jar next to it. You made it yourself. You left a nickel on the counter. You walked out. Cattle drives, mining camps, logging operations. They all ran on sourdough and bacon grease at some point. It was the baseline, the absolute minimum, the thing you ate when there was nothing else and you needed something now. It saved more lives than anyone counted. Number 1, beans. Not beans and bacon, not beans and anything, just beans. Every meal on this list builds to this. Pinto beans soaked overnight, boiled for hours with nothing but water and salt, served in a tin cup or a shallow bowl, eaten with a spoon or a piece of bread or just your hands if that was all you had. Beans were the foundation of every Western diet from 1850 to 1890. A cowboy on a cattle drive ate beans twice a day for 3 months. A miner in California ate beans for breakfast before going underground. A settler in Kansas ate beans through the winter because beans were the only thing that lasted. A pound of dried beans cost 6 cents in 1870 and fed 4 people. Nothing was cheaper. Nothing lasted longer. Nothing was easier to cook. You needed water, fire, and time. That was it. Here is what beans did. They kept you alive when nothing else would. They filled your stomach. They gave you enough energy to work. They did not taste good. They did not taste bad. They tasted like sustenance. That was their entire purpose. Trail cooks boiled beans in a pot every single day. The pot never got washed, just refilled. The flavor built over weeks. The beans absorbed the memory of every meal before them. By the end of a drive, the beans tasted different than they did at the start. Better, deeper, more themselves. Outlaws ate beans. Lawmen ate beans. Ranchers ate beans. Everyone ate beans. It was the one universal constant in a violent, unstable, unpredictable time. You could not trust the bank. You could not trust the railroad. You could not trust the man sitting next to you. But you could trust beans. They did not spoil. They did not require skill to cook. They did not care if you were rich or poor, honest or crooked, headed to church or headed to rob a stagecoach. Beans were democratic. Beans were reliable. Beans were the Old West. A saloon in Tombstone in 1881 served beans every day at noon. Wyatt Earp ate them. Doc Holliday ate them. The Cowboys, they would later shoot at the O.K. Corral ate them. Same pot, same beans, different tables. That is not a meal. That is a monument to the fact that hunger does not care about your story. And beans, plain beans with nothing else, solved hunger better than anything else available. They won, not because they were good, because they worked. Third pattern break. The West was not won by gunslingers. It was won by cooks who knew how to make beans last 3 months and cowboys who could eat them for 90 days straight without losing their minds. That is the real history. Everything else is decoration. Make beans this week. Just beans. Soak them overnight. Boil them with salt. Eat them plain. Then tell me in the comments if you made it past day 2. Tell me if you understand now why cowboys looked forward to oyster stew. Some of you are thinking about your grandmother's bean recipe right now. That recipe came from somewhere. It came from this.